Thank you so much. Beautiful music, beautiful message. Don't you know that that was a long, awkward breakfast there on the beach when the risen Christ hosted Peter and the other disciples with that grilled fish and bread? The story says they knew it was Jesus, but they didn't want to say anything. I imagine not. And I'll bet their breakfast conversation was both strained and shallow. Could you pass the fish? Great fish, isn't it? Oh, I really like this bread, don't you? How about them Broncos? Strained pleasantries in the presence of the one whom they had all abandoned at the end. But now, he's back. And the breakfast is over, and Jesus isn't going to let Peter off the hook. He clears his throat and looks at Peter, and Peter thinks, uh-oh, here we go. But Jesus simply says, Peter, do you love me more than these? Now, the word these here in the Greek is vague. It could mean more than these guys. It could mean more than the food that we just had. But the most reasonable translation is probably, Peter, do you love me more than anything else? And Peter responds twice, yes, Lord, you know I love you. But here's an interesting thing that our English translation obscures. There is more than one word for love in Greek. And the first two times that Jesus asks Peter the question, Jesus uses the word agapas, which means self-sacrificing, selfless, self-transcending love. Peter, do you agapas me more than anything else? But Peter responds with a different form of the word, philo. Now, philo means brotherly love or affection. It's the kind of usage a football player might say at the end of a close-fought game, I sure do philo you guys. But Jesus notices the word Peter has used, because the third time he asks Peter his question, he turns that word back on him. Peter, do you philo me more than anything else? Now, this is a crucial point in the story. Why? Well, Jesus' use of Peter's word here could have been seen as understandably sarcastic. Yeah, you philo me as long as your skin is safe, Peter, right? Otherwise, you run away, you deny me. Yeah, you philo me. Now, we might have made that kind of sarcastic response, but not Jesus. No, you see, in Jesus' mouth, this question is actually a moment of redemption. For instead of seeing Peter's use of the word philo as a way of distancing himself from Jesus, Jesus looks deep into Peter's heart and understands that Peter probably does not feel worthy of claiming agapas, selfless love. He doesn't feel worthy of claiming that for Jesus. After all, he failed Jesus more than once, and Peter has the sense enough and the shame enough to know that any claim now to agapas that he might make would sound rather shallow and false. For his actions on that last day of Jesus' earthly life spoke much louder than his words, didn't they? And the story here even subtly reminds us of Peter's failures to love and to stand up for Jesus with such a seemingly humdrum touch as the fire over which Jesus cooked those fish. Why? Well, the word for that fire on which Jesus cooks their breakfast is only used one other time in the gospel. And that was when Peter was standing beside the fire and told, after Jesus was arrested, and told the person who asked him, "No, Jesus? No, never heard of him. Who? Jesus who? I don't know him." Not once, but 3 times, as he stood by the fire, the same fire that Jesus has now lit on the beach. No doubt, then, Peter is now remembering his failure and his fecklessness as Jesus insistently questions him, and so he waits. He waits for Jesus to drop the other shoe. Something like, "Yeah, Peter, be gone. Go away from me. I'm going to find somebody more reliable to lead my church." But instead, Jesus does something utterly remarkable. Instead of castigating Peter for his failure of nerve, for his failure of self-transcending love, for his failure of what he was unable to be, Jesus, instead of doing those things, gives Peter a commission in 3 slightly different ways. Did you notice? Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. Peter is often called the first pastor, sometimes the first bishop of the church. And because of that, these 3 commands are often addressed to ministers at their ordinations. But they are for more than just ministers. Jesus' words are in fact for each one of us. Now, each of these commands is subtly different, but it's the first one, feed my lambs, that I want to say more about. Lambs are the most vulnerable of the flock. When Barbara and I lived in California, coyotes and even mountain lions would occasionally take lambs. In Hawaii, it was the nasty and scary feral hogs that had a taste for mutton. Lambs are vulnerable. And Jesus is telling Peter and telling us that part of the work of being the church, of being a Christian in this world, is to give special attention to those who are most vulnerable among us. Feed my lambs. I don't know what that commission would come to mean for Peter, but I invite you this morning to ask yourself what Jesus' commission might mean for you. For you, it might mean giving extra time or attention or money to help those organizations and ministries that seek to aid at-risk children or the elderly. It might mean volunteering for a role during Interfaith Hospitality Week here. It might mean calling on your legislators to do more to protect the most vulnerable among us. It might mean making sure that every time you take a grocery list into King Soopers, it has on it items for ESM's food pantry. It might mean that you refuse to laugh, or that you even confront someone when a racist slur is used, or a homophobic or sexist joke is told, or an ugly ethnic characterization is made. Feed my lambs. Feed my lambs. In the closing of today's story, Jesus addresses Peter, quote, "And they will take you where you do not wish to go." We know those kind of days, don't we? When where we thought we were going ended up being far different from where we actually went. And sometimes those surprises are not pleasant. And Peter also found himself totally surprised by where this new day, with the sun barely up, had already taken him. After all, think about it. The very fact that he had gone back to his life as a fisherman, that he hadn't believed those women who told him that Jesus had been resurrected, that instead of gathering the other disciples and followers around him to continue to live out what Jesus had taught, the fact that he had done none of those things, that all suggests that Peter had made his peace with his failure of nerve, his failure to love, and that he now must have just wanted to fade away back into his old life. But life was going to take him elsewhere, for Jesus had other ideas, other intentions. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. And the story then closes a few verses later with another command by Jesus: follow me. Life indeed sometimes takes us where we weren't expecting. That can be gloriously so or tragically so. In the end, though, there are three things that I think that we can learn from this story. First, God never stops trying to transform us and lead us beyond our failures. Jesus didn't give up on Peter, and God doesn't give up on any of us. Second, Jesus feeds us. We know that, but sometimes we are tempted, oh so tempted, to take our nourishment elsewhere, or what we think is nourishment. Sometimes we are oh so tempted by the junk food of hate radio and conspiracy theories that permeate our culture. Or sometimes we would prefer to feed on the false manna of stereotypes that drive wedges between people. But Jesus feeds us and this world with the grilled fish of unconditional love. Why were there exactly, did you notice this detail? Exactly 153 fish caught by Peter and the disciples? Well, in ancient times it was said that there were exactly 153 species of fish in the Sea of Galilee. And with that, the symbolism kind of becomes obvious. The nets of God's love are intended to encompass every single person that God has made. That's the nourishment with which Jesus feeds us. And third, notice something. Every single post-resurrection appearance of Jesus that is recorded in the Gospels ends with Jesus commissioning somebody to do something. With the women at the tomb, it was, go and tell. With Peter, it is, follow me. Jesus feeds us not just that we might be fed, but so that we will be in a position, we will be able to be in a position to accept his commission, to follow him indeed. Do we know exactly where that will lead us? No. Like Peter, God may take us someplace we didn't expect. God may ask of us something that we never thought we could do. God may turn our lives in directions that we didn't even realize were possible. God may have in mind all kinds of sheep that we didn't know needed feeding and who are now part of our responsibility. God may place us in places that surprise us. But through it all, God will feed us. God will use the best that is within us. God will help us tend those sheep that God puts in our path. for that good news and for that opportunity. Thanks be to God.